here we are, exhausted, slightly startled, wondering if trying to do 4 full videos in 2 weeks' time was a bad idea. It was, but we made it anyway, with a slight adjustment to schedule. And if you haven't followed the whole 4 video journey, I'll have each one linked below in the description and you can binge the whole series all at once. And if you have seen them all, let's bring this thing home with Resident Evil Code Veronica. Resident Evil Code Veronica, or later known as Code Veronica X, when it was released onto the PS2 with an additional 10 minutes of cutscenes. The main game itself was untouched outside of a few graphical changes and Steve Burnside's hair. No, not Steve Burns. Steve Burnside. What's that? Who's Steve? We'll get to that. All you need to know is that they made his hair emo. I mean, I guess you may be asking who Steve is because I gave zero context as to why Code Veronica became Code Veronica X. Well, that's because it was originally a Dreamcast exclusive, and Capcom knew that thing had a smaller audience than I do. So to push some real copies of the game, they did some minor upgrades, the ones I just mentioned, and ported the game over to the biggest audience in gaming at that time, the PlayStation 2. Starting with my personal history, as we always do, Code Veronica X was one that I played a lot, but not on the Dreamcast or the PS2. I only ever played the now in HD Xbox 360 port from 2011. It's the exact same as the PS2 version, but it is a little more yellow, I think. If you're wondering why Microsoft's HD DVD didn't take off, here's a comparison of HD DVD and a Blu-ray. I would say that Code Veronica is the fixed camera era Resident Evil game I've played the most. Not because I think it's the best one or anything like that. It was just a right place, right time kind of thing. I was 15 and really starting to get into retro gaming. I remember I had a PS1 in the garage at the time that I would play the first 12 minutes or so of Metal Gear Solid 1 on all the time because I didn't have a memory card. And this 2011 port released around the same time and was the most accessible retro Resident Evil game. And this game was the dawn of my love for fixed cam Resident Evil games. But I haven't been back to Code Veronica in years. We've been in a bit of a Resident Evil renaissance in the past 6 years since Resident Evil 7 came out. That number of years hurts. So I'm ready to pick this game back up as a true experienced Resident Evil fan to see if it's as great as I remember. Taking place just 3 months after the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3, Code Veronica has almost a Mission Impossible type opening, with Claire running through lasers and gunfire, and then she gets held up and tries to escape the standoff by falling down. But here's the wild thing. It works. So I view Code Veronica as kind of like a milestone for the franchise, because Code Veronica is where the series goes completely off the rails and takes a Fast and Furious style of storytelling. This isn't the most absurd thing. I mean, they could just like unload on her like a firing squad, but it's still not too ridiculous. I'm really just using now as a good time to warn you that at some point in this video, things are going to get nuts. Possibly even mixed nuts. Claire does end up getting captured here and taken to a prison cell on an island in the South Pacific Ocean known as Rockford Island. The island was taken over by Umbrella years ago to accommodate its growing paramilitary, and it also included concentration camps for enemies and traitors to the company. While Claire's there, the prison gets attacked and overrun with zombies and monsters, so Claire is set free to find a way to escape the island. Now we're going to get into the gameplay updates, but this time there's actually some downgrades as well. I think I made it clear in the last video that I was a fan of the more actiony and free-moving updates to the controls in Resident Evil 3, but apparently the team working on Code Veronica is not, because they stripped all that back out and returned it to the basics. Remember the dodge mechanic I was such a big fan of in 3? That's gone. You're back to stiffly just kind of wandering around them. Ammo crafting to help you fight off the scarcity of ammo, well, that's gone too. The free stare movement is even gone. A few things from the older titles did manage to make their way into this game, those being upgradable weapons, the side pack to upgrade inventory, and the ability to spin items when checking them. But most importantly, they left us the 180 quick turn, cementing it as a permanent Resident Evil fixture, saving my life time and time again. But it really saves our life in this title, because the base spin is so stiff and lifeless, it's irresponsible to have a turn animation of that quality. She looks like she's rotating on a microwave plate. Hey man, what are you cooking? Claire sandwich. Ha 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 ha. Who am I kidding? Doesn't hit the same.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
All the animations in this game look a little weaker than its predecessors, and that's because of a pretty big change you possibly might have noticed, but probably not. Yeah, this game does not have pre-rendered backgrounds. All of the backgrounds are in-engine 3D models. This is a huge step into the future for Resi, but that can come with some new issues. If the hardware is working on rendering these backgrounds, then you may have to suffer some wonky animations. But it also brings in some really cool new things like dynamic lighting systems, so you can use your lighter to find your way around in the dark, adding a little bit more of that unsettling ambiance to the not so well lit rooms. This also adds moving cameras, but not in the way that you would think. You can't move them on your own. The cameras are still in a fixed position, but sometimes the camera won't entirely be fixed and will follow you around the room almost like a security camera. This could help with fights not needing to transition between camera angles to see all of the monsters. This also helps with less interactions with the old hitch problem. You know in the other games when you transition between frames and you get that solid 2-second delay while the game tries to find the background image? You won't have a hitch if the camera is following you around. And I think that this is the best new thing that Code Veronica offers. I mean, there isn't much else new in the gameplay department, so I'm kind of grasping at straws here. But if I had to pick one, it's probably this. While these things are great from a gameplay perspective, from a visual side, they can be a bit unseemly. Just look at 2 and Veronica X side by side. Let's leave it to our panel of judges to decide on a scale of 1 to 10. Judges, what do you think of 2? 10, 10, and 10. Looks like we have 10s across the board. That'll be hard to beat. And what do you think of Veronica X, judges? 3, 5, and that one's not even a number. There actually is a few other little updates. Claire can take a little more damage in this one. That's helpful because enemies are absolutely relentless, especially because they respawn now. Unlike in the last 3 installments, you can't clear out the entire game of enemies because they will just keep respawning. This is really pushing the need to run and dodge away from the zombies instead of trying to kill everything. But if you want to kill stuff, this game introduces all new weapon types, and that's the dual-wielded weapons. These can be used to attack 2 monsters at once to help with crowd control. But the new update that will save you time and time again, just like the quick turn, is the ability to use herbs when you find them without adding them to your inventory. So if you're in a bind and you need to heal with a full inventory, if you find an herb, you're in luck because you can just use it directly from the pickup screen instead of wasting some ammo or running all the way back to an item box to offload some extra stuff and risk getting killed. As usual, we also get some new enemy types this adventure, those being the Bandersnatch, a big stretchy arm guy, and the Albinoid, I think is how it's pronounced. And I'm 100% serious, not joking at all with you right now. It is just a T-virus infected salamander. We also do get some of the coolest boss creatures in the series so far, like Nosferatu, the Glupworm, please don't Google that one, along with a handful of story-spoiling bosses that I won't get into quite yet, because we're not at that portion of the video yet. Well, I guess we can be soon. A few more little things first, though. If you haven't noticed in 4 videos, that's my go-to transition when I don't know how to lead into stuff. Like Resident Evil 3, there is no selectable protagonist in Code Veronica. This is a slight story spoiler, but you don't play as Claire for the entire game. You start as Claire looking for Chris, but halfway through the game you'll switch over to Chris for the back half of the game, including both characters in one storyline for the first time instead of being split up into 2 sides of the same story. Chris's section actually takes place after Claire's, and you switch back to Claire throughout it. The best part of this melded together story is that the item box keeps all of its content across the characters. So if Claire left a shotgun in the item box before the character switch, then Chris can take it out and use it. This is actually a pretty big mechanic that isn't only exclusive to the item box. If Claire unlocks some doors, they'll be unlocked when Chris gets to them. If Claire doesn't pick up an herb or ammo or any other item, then Chris can pick it up later on. But if she takes it, then it's just gone. There's also some changes in the dialogue and cutscenes depending on how many zombies are killed in an area or how fast you get somewhere or how you kill a boss even. This is by far the most diverse Resident Evil game so far. There are even certain items that one character will pick up and they have to give to the other character to use it or make it usable. This is the thing that sets Code Veronica apart from any other Resident Evil game. The other last thing I need to dive into before we get into the story is the battle game. This is a mini game where you pick between 5 different characters and get timed on how fast you can defeat every enemy in a room. It's Code Veronica's lesser version of the Mercenaries. I didn't mention the Mercenaries in the last video. It's a really good side mode where you see how many enemies you can kill within a time limit. And it reoccurs throughout the rest of the series after this, except for Code Veronica, where we get Battle Game. The coolest thing about the Battle Game is that it gives D.I.J. a name. D.I.J. is a mouse that appears a couple times throughout the story and writes a 14-page journal about the story's events he witnesses, and you can find that in Battle Game. Told you the story gets wacky on this one. But that is also still not the wackiest this gets. And we're about to get into all the absurdities of this story, but if you don't want spoilers, you can part ways here, so subscribe so you don't forget once you're done to come back here and finish out this wild ride with us. So Claire is free to explore Rockford Island. Pretty quickly after leaving her cell, almost gets lit up by a 12-year-old Canadian wielding a machine gun. But it turns out it's an adult that just sounds like a 12-year-old.
Wait right there. I'm coming over.
And this adult's name is Steve. Remember from earlier? Still not that one. Steve is another prisoner that escaped during the attack like Claire did, and acts as Claire's partner character for this adventure. Steve functions just as any other partner character did in the game, showing up here and there with short sections where you play as him. But Steve is my favorite. I don't know why. He has a child's voice, he's obnoxious, and he's an absolute creep, but gosh, I just love Steve. Anyway, Steve leaves to find an escape plane, and Claire goes looking for a way to contact help. She eventually finds a computer she uses to contact Leon, I assume with an email because it's 1998, but it could have been AOL Instant Messenger. It would have been out by a year at that time, which means it would be pretty dang popular. She then finds this big mansion castle where she stumbles upon a video of 2 little blonde kids. Leaving the palace, Claire almost gets her wig blown off by Alfred Ashford. At least, I think that's what his name is supposed to be. He says it is Alfred Ashford.
I am Alfred Ashford, commander of this base.
And who would know his name better than him? They have a little fight, and then after leaving the little castle mansion thing, Claire gets attacked by a Bandersnatch, and Big Daddy Burnside swoops in to save the day. And this is when we get to play as Steve going on a murderous rampage before he comes across his infected father, who was also a prisoner on Rockford Island. But Steve does what he has to do and shoots his dad because he's a stone-cold killer.
I can't! No! Steve! Father!
See? Stone cold. And then Claire leaves Steve to cry about his dad because she's an excellent friend. And then she runs into somebody we haven't seen for a while. That's right. Albert Wesker isn't dead. You probably had no idea he was coming back. I winked in that first video and I bet nobody caught it. It wasn't very obvious at all. And not only is he back, but he has superpowers. I told you it goes off the rails here. But that's nowhere near the most insane thing that happens in this game. Claire runs into Alfred's sister, Alexia, who is the other small blonde child from that video. They do some fighting, and then Claire and Steve find out that Alexia is really just Alfred in a wig. He's Norman Batesing it. I told you, this story is insane. Alfred gets mad that they find out about his double personality, so he releases a tyrant because every game needs one, and Steve and Claire escape on a seaplane. And they go in for a water landing, but that's okay because it's a seaplane. The tyrant attacks the plane, and it's a nightmare of a boss fight that made me quit playing the game every time I played it. So I never made it to Chris's portion of the game before, because it starts immediately after this. But I wouldn't be a real video producer, man, if I didn't ram my head into the wall over and over again to bring you this review. But that may have contributed to this video possibly being multiple days late. So we kill the tyrant, and Alfred autopilots the plane to Antarctica. Steve tries to kiss Claire in her sleep, because he's an absolute creep, as we've established. When they land, they're captured trying to escape, and we switch to Chris that's just climbing up the side of the island. Chris has a pretty long section where he backtracks through Rockford Island, and there's not much story here at all until the end where he fights Wesker. Then he goes to Antarctica to save Claire. He finds her at a weird copy of the Spencer Mansion. Then we switch back to Claire looking for Steve, and when she finds him, and I promise I'm not crying when I say this. Our sweet baby boy Steve is infected. Steve tries to kill Claire and then comes to his senses and saves her, and we get this really dramatic scene.
Got to hang in there, okay? My brother's come to save us.
You know, I don't think Chris can help with this one.
We're getting out of here.
Your brother kept his promise. I'm sorry, I cannot.
What? What are you saying?
I'm glad that I met you. I love you.
I love you too, Steve.
Claire.
Then there's some superpower fights between Wesker and Alexia. Chris can't get to Claire because she's locked behind a door. They activate a self-destruct sequence to open the door. Claire leaves to find an escape route while Chris fights Alexia. Then Chris finds Wesker holding Claire and he just kind of lets her go. And then Wesker rocks Chris like he's a boulder. We'll get into that joke next year. So Chris drops some beams on Wesker and the place starts blowing up and Wesker gets his face all burnt up and Chris runs away to meet Claire so they can escape on a jet. And that is the end of Code Veronica. Code Veronica is definitely the black sheep of the fixed cam era. It's weird, it's innovative, and behind at the same time, and it sets Resident Evil on a path for the bizarre. But I still absolutely adore this game. But this is the end of RE Ween for 2023. It's been a long, tiring 2 weeks. I don't want to edit another video for a year. I want to play Spider-Man 2 that's been sitting on the coffee table over here 3 feet away from me for over a week. I want to finish those last few episodes of Ted Lasso. And I want to go to sleep before 1 a.m. So thank you for coming on this wild journey with me. Please subscribe and check out the things I do the rest of the year. And if you don't do that, I'll see you next year. Go enter the survival horror.